Okay, in this section we're going to see how we can solve any quadratic equation by completing the square. Okay, completing the square is basically, the basic steps is that you're going to rewrite a quadratic expression, as it says right here. You can take any quadratic expression and rewrite it as a perfect square trinomial. When we do that, we can solve it by taking the square roots, which is what we learned in the previous section, right? We can take the square roots of both sides to solve it. So that's the goal in this section. Write any quadratic expression as a perfect square trinomial. Once we have that, we can solve it by taking square roots. So the basic steps of rewriting a quadratic expression as a perfect square trinomial or completing the square is very simple. First thing you do is find the b term. Okay, whatever the b term, that's the one that is important. So for example, here in example A, the b term is 4, right? B equals 4. You take that number, you divide it by half, okay, by 2, divide it by half, or cut it in half, actually, I should say. So divide it by 2 or cut it in half, and then after that, whatever you get, you square it. Okay, so square that number. So here in the example, I have 4. When I cut it in half, I get 2, and then when I square that, I get back up to 4. Okay, that's a coincidence here that this 4 and this 4 are not the same 4, right? So you cut it in half, that's 2, square it, you get 4. Whatever number you get, you're going to add that number to the end of your trinomial. Okay, so my final solution here is x squared plus 4x plus 4, which is a perfect square trinomial as we saw before. And so if I wanted to solve this perfect square trinomial or factor this perfect square trinomial, I could go ahead and just break it down into a binomial that is squared, where my second term is the square root of my c term, right? The square root of 4 is 2. This x plus 2 squared is x squared plus 4x plus 4. Let's look at another example. Here I have x squared minus 8x. Okay, so your first thing is to find b. What is the b term? In this case, b is negative 8. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take that negative 8, and you're going to cut it in half. Negative 8 over 2. And then whatever you get, which is negative 4, you're going to square that. Negative 4 squared is 16. And so the number that you're going to add to the end of your expression is 16. And notice that the number that we get is always going to be positive. Okay, so even when b was negative in this example, b is negative 8, we still added 16. We didn't subtract 16, we still add 16. And in the previous example, b is 4 and we added 4, right? You're always going to be adding that final number. So question here says, when b is negative, why is the result added to the expression still positive? Notice what happens. We cut it in half, but then we square. So this squaring step right here, this squaring step turns everything into a positive term. So the result is always added because we're always going to get a positive no matter what. We have to square. Okay, so it's your turn. Go ahead and try number 4 right here. Okay, on your own paper, try to complete the square real quick. Pause the video right now. And once you think you have the answer, unpause and come back and see what the correct answer is. Okay, so let's look at this one. X squared plus 12x. First step is to find b. b is 12. Take b and cut it in half. So when I cut this in half, I get 6. Then take that number and square it. So when I square 6, I get 36. So my final solution is 36, which means that my new trinomial is x squared plus 12x plus 36. And that is a perfect square trinomial. I have completed the square. So how is completing the square useful? We actually can solve quadratic equations by completing the square. Actually, any type of quadratic equation can be solved by completing the square. Okay, so look at the example A right here. We have x squared minus 4x equals 3. First of all, your expression must be in this form. Okay, it must be in the form x squared minus bx equals a certain number. Okay, so on the other side you have all the constants. Then you find b, which in this case is -4. You half it and square it, right? So half of -4 is -2. Square that, you get +4, and you add it to the end. Half it, square it, add it. So you add 4. Now, since it's an equation, whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. So we added 4 on both sides. And then what you do is you simplify the right side, so to get 7, and you factor the left side. This is a perfect square trinomial that we saw before, right? The first term is a square, perfect square. The last term is a perfect square. And the square root of both of these numbers times each other times 2 gives you the middle term. Okay. So since this is a perfect square trinomial, I can go ahead and go to the next step of factoring it out, which is x minus 2 quantity squared. And then after that, it becomes a much simpler process because this is a very simple equation to solve. These are the type that we saw before, where you just take the square root of both sides, which is exactly what happened here. They went ahead and they took the square root of this side and they took the square root of this side. And when you do that, the square cancels the square root, leaving you with x minus 2 equals plus or minus, let's not forget the plus or minus, radical 7. And then at the end, all you got to do is just split it up into two solutions. X minus 2 equals +7 on this case, and x minus 2 equals -7 on this case over here. And then you add 2 to both sides, so your solutions are x equals 2 plus radical 7 or x equals 2 minus radical 7. They can be written together as x equals 2 plus or minus radical 7. Same thing. Let's try another one. X squared plus 16x equals 36. Okay. First of all, find your b term. In this case, b equals 16. So you must find that term first. Make sure that your equation is written in the form that we like. This is the form that we like. X squared plus bx equals c. Okay. So b equals 16. What you're going to do is you're going to half it, cut it in half, which gives you 8. Square it. So square the 8 gives you 64. Add it. That number is the number that is going to be added to the end of your equation, okay, on both sides. So my equation is now 1x squared plus 16x plus 64, because I'm adding a 64 at the end. And on the right side, I have 36 plus 64. I need to add the 64 to both sides. I go ahead and factor this one. Now you can factor this by grouping, okay? But the main idea here is that you can do this fast because this is a perfect square trinomial. So all you have to do, since we know for sure it's a perfect square trinomial, how am I sure? Because I completed the square. When you complete the square, you know for sure it's a perfect square trinomial. All you have to do is write it as a parentheses squared, as a binomial squared, where the first term is the square root of your first term. So the square root of 1 is 1. And the second term is the square root of your last term here, 64. The square root of 64 is 8. And that's all you got to write. 1x plus 8. You actually don't have to write the 1, but it helps you to see it better. 1x plus 8 is squared equals, and then go ahead and add the right side, which is 100. Once you have that, it becomes a much simpler process. Now what you have to do is take the square root of both sides, because that's how we get rid of the square. So what's left on the left side is 1x plus 8, because the square cancels the radical. And on the right side, you have plus or minus 10. And remember that plus or minus 10, there's actually two numbers there. There's a positive 10 and a negative 10. That's where your two solutions come from. So let's worry about the positive 10. The first equation is 1x plus 8 equals 10, which when you solve it, subtract 8 and you get x equals 2. The second equation is 1x plus 8 equals negative 10, which when you solve it, you subtract 8 from both sides, so you get negative 18. Those are your two solutions. Now how can I check that my answer is correct? 2 and negative 18. Plug them in into the original equation. Plug them both in. So we plug in negative 18, we get negative 18 squared plus 16 times negative 18 again, because we're plugging in negative 18. We get negative 18 times negative 18, which is 324. and 16 times negative 18, which is going to be minus 288. And then 324 minus 288 is 36. So that gives me a true equation. 36 equals 36. Therefore, x equals negative 18 is a solution to the equation x squared plus 16x equals 36. Let's test out the other solution, which, as you recall, was 2. 2. So we tested out negative 18. Now let's test out 2. Plug in 2, so 2 squared right here, plus 16 times 2 equals 36. 2 squared is 4. 16 times 2 is 32. 4 plus 32 is 36. I get a statement which is true. Therefore, x equals 2 is a solution to the equation. Okay, now it's your turn. Try these two, please, on your own paper, number 5 and number 6. Every time that it's your turn, go ahead and pause the video, figure out the problems on your own, and then unpause it if you want to see the correct answer. Okay, let's look at the correct answers here. X squared minus 10x equals 11. First of all, find b. In this case, b is negative 10. Half it, that means cut it in half, that's negative 5. Square it, that means square negative 5, it's positive 25. Add it, so we're going to add 25 to both sides. So what I'm going to have now, it's x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 11 plus 25. Then what you do is you go ahead and combine the terms on the right side. 25 plus 11 is 36. On the left side, you have a perfect square trinomial, and it's very easy to factor. Okay, the square root of the first term is x. The square root of the last term is 5. The sign is determined by the sign in the middle of your original trinomial, so it's going to be negative in this case. There, it's factored. Now what you do is you take the square root of both sides to get rid of the square. Square cancels square root, leaving you with x minus 5 equals plus or minus 36 is a perfect square, happens to be 6. And now what you do is you add 5 to both sides. And your solutions are, remember to look at this as two different numbers, positive 6 and negative 6. Positive 6, negative 6. So if I do it with positive 6 first, positive 6 plus 5 is 11. Negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. Those are your two solutions there. Okay, let's look at number 6 now. Same idea as before. Find b first. So in this case, b equals 6. Half it. Cut it in half, that's 3. Square it. 3 squared is 9. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. So here's my new equation. X squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 2 plus 9, which is 11. Take the left side and factor it. It's a perfect square trinomial, so it works out perfectly. Square root of the first one, which is x. Square root of their last term, which is 3. Square root of 9 is 3. And then the sign is determined by your b term, which is positive 6, so plus 3, equals 11. Now to solve that, you're going to take the square root of both sides, and you get x plus 3 equals plus or minus radical 11. And finally, you're going to subtract 3 from both sides, and you get x equals, now in this case over here on this side, you cannot combine the radical 11 with the negative 3. They are not like terms. So you got to write them both separately. Okay. What you should do first is write the negative 3, and then at the end write the plus or minus radical 11. So you write your solution like this. Negative 3 plus or minus radical 11. That is your final answer. Now what happens if your a term is not 1, like we've seen in the past couple of problems, right? All of them had an a term which is 1. Makes everything so much easier, okay? If your a term is not 1, like in this example right here, part A, 4x squared minus 8x equals 21, where a is 4, then your usual half it, square it, add it is going to change. It is now going to be half it, square it, divided by a, whatever a happens to be, then add it. Okay, and that will create a perfect square trinomial, which is what we want. Okay, so just remember, if a is not 1, if it's anything other than 1, like 4, or down here we have another one where a is 9, then you're not going to half it, square it, add it. You're going to half it, square it, divide it by a, and then add it. Okay, that's the way it's going to work every single time, as long as a is a perfect square as well. So watch how we're going to do part A and part B here, and watch how everything works out perfectly. Okay, so here we have letter A. Ignore all this work. It's all correct, but I want to show you guys exactly how it works out. So sometimes when the work is already there, it confuses you. So here we go. I'm going to use this space over here. 4x squared minus 8x equals 21. Okay, so let me write it down right here. 4x squared minus 8x equals 21. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that a is a perfect square. It works out better if it is. If it's not a perfect square, there's another extra step we have to take. So a is 4. That's a perfect square. Great. It works. Then look for b. In this case, it's negative 8. You're going to half it. Cut it in half. That's negative 4. Square it. Negative 4 squared. That's 16. Don't add it yet. What you need to do is divide by a, whatever a happens to be. In this case, a is 4, so I'm going to divide by 4. So when I divide 16 by 4, I get 4. That's your magic number. Now you add it. Okay? So now my new equation looks like this. 4x squared minus 8x plus 4 equals 21 plus 4. Now I'm going to simplify this. 21 plus 4 is 25. On the left side, if I did my steps correctly, I should have a perfect square. So I can go ahead and factor it because it's a perfect square trinomial. Okay? If you want to test it out, you can say 4x squared, the square root of that is 2x. The last term is 4, the square root of that is 2. 2x times 2 is 4x. Double it, you get 8. So see how that works? That is a perfect square trinomial. So to take the square root of that, take the square root of the first term, 2x. The square root of the last term, 2. Keep the sign of your b, which is negative. There. Now I can finish it using the same steps as before. Take the square root of both sides. The square cancels the square root. So 2x minus 2 equals plus or minus, you always take that step right here, 5. You add 2 to both sides, and your final solution is 2x is equal to, oh, not your final solution, close to your final solution actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Positive 5 plus 2 is 7, and also negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3. So I got to take one more step. Notice that I got two different numbers here because I used the positive 5 and the negative 5. Now I divide by 2, and my two solutions are those two. X equals 7 halves and negative 3 halves. Okay, let's try it again. In this case, I have 9x squared plus 6x equals 10. 9 is a perfect square, so I can do the exact same steps that I did before. Half it, square it, divide it by a, then add it. So in this case, it's 6, right? B is 6. Half it, that's 3. Square it, that's 9. Divided by a, which also happens to be 9. So my answer is 1. That's the number that I'm going to add at the end. So here's what my equation looks like. Okay, 9x squared plus 6x plus 1, which is the number that I found right now, equals 10 plus 1. Add 1 to both sides. Take the square root, factor the trinomial on the left side, Now it's real easy to factor. The first number is a perfect square, so it's just 3x. The last number is a perfect square, which is 1. 3x plus 1 squared equals 11. 10 plus 1. Take the square root of both sides. That's the next step right here. Take the square root of this side, take the square root of that side, leaving me with 3x plus 1 equals plus or minus radical 11. And here's where my two solutions come from. In the boxes provided here, they have split it up into two separate equations, so we'll do it that way. Whereas before we did it as one problem, and it's okay either way. Okay. So in this case, it's 3x plus 1 equals positive radical 11. The other one is 3x plus 1 equals negative radical 11. Solve them both by subtracting 1 from both sides. Subtract 1 here, subtract 1 there. We're going to get 3x equals negative 1 plus radical 11. In the other one, we're going to get 3x equals negative 1 minus radical 11, because you're subtracting 1 from both sides. And finally, you're going to divide by 3 to get rid of the 3. Divide by 3 here, divide by 3 on that other one as well. It's negative 1 plus radical 11 over 3, and negative 1 minus radical 11 over 3. Okay, it's your turn. Try here number 8 and number 9. They're both perfectly set up so you could solve them the exact same way that I did it before. If at any point you get confused, make sure you just rewind back to the example, watch it again, see what you're supposed to do. Okay, in this case, both of them have a perfect square as a. Okay, so you could do this. Remember, half it, square it, divide it by a, then add it. Go for it. Okay, so here I go. Watch how I do this one, number 8. Okay, first of all, I notice that the first term is that the a term is a perfect square. That helps me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the middle term b, negative 16. I'm going to do the steps in my head now, okay? So follow me along. Negative 16, half it, that's 8. Square it, that's 64. Divided by 16, which is a, and you get 4. Your magic number is 4. Once again, take 16, right here, half it, that's negative 8. Square it, that's 64. Divided by a here, and you get 4. So your magic number is 4. So here we go. My equation now looks like this. 16x squared minus 16x plus 4 equals 5 plus 4. On the right side I have 9. On the left side I have a perfect square trinomial. So I always write parentheses squared. Square root of the first term is 4x. Square root of the last term is 2. Let me rewrite that. 4x. Square root of the last term is 2. And the middle is, the sign in the middle is negative because b is negative. Take the square root of both sides, which is how you're going to eliminate the square. And you get 4x minus 2 equals plus or minus 3. Right? The square root of 9 is 3, but we must include the plus or minus. And 2 steps left, add 2. When I do that, I get 4x equals, remember there's 2 pieces here, a positive 3 and a negative 3. Positive 3 plus 2 is 5. And negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. I'm doing both at the same time, but you can split it up into 2 pieces if you want to solve it separately. Divide by 4. Divide by 4. Divide that one by 4. So your final solutions are 5/4, 5 over 4, and negative 1 over 4. Okay, now let's look at number 9. Once again, a is a perfect square, which helps me out a lot. So I'm going to take b, which is 12, and once again, watch, do this on your head. 12, half it, 6, square it, 36, divided by a, 36 divided by 4 is 9, and add it. The magic number is 9. We're going to add that number. So here's what my equation looks like. 4x squared plus 12x plus 9 equals 14. Because I add 9 to both sides. 5 plus 9 is 14. Factor the trinomial on the left side. It's a perfect square trinomial. The square root of the first term is 2x. The square root of the last term is 3. The sign in the middle is positive because b is positive. And on the right side I have 14. take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with, the square cancels the square root, 2x plus 3 equals, I'm going to split it up into 2, okay, so you can see it better. Positive radical 14, but also 2x plus 3 equals negative radical 14. There's my plus or minus. I'm just splitting it up into 2 so you can see it better. To solve this one on the left, I subtract 3. Don't make the rookie mistake. Do not subtract 14 minus 3. Don't say radical 11. It's 2x equals negative 3 plus radical 14. Remember to write them separately. And finally, divide by 2. And there's your solution. X equals, I don't want to rewrite it, so this is your solution. Same thing on the right side. I'm going to subtract 3. Subtract 3. Once again, don't make the rookie mistake. Negative 14 and negative 3 don't combine because it's radical. Negative radical 14. Okay. 2x equals negative 3 minus radical 14. Divide by 2. And there's your solution once again. X equals, I don't want to rewrite it, but it's this one right there. Negative 3 minus radical 14 over 2. If you did not separate them out, then your solution should have been negative 3 plus or minus radical 14 all over 2. Same thing. Okay, so what happens when the first term is not a perfect square? Okay, what if you don't get a 4 or a 9 or a 1, which is the easiest one we can get? Like for example here, I got a 2. Okay, in that case you have two options. Option 1 is divide by that number to make it 1, right? So it's divide by 2, and that way it's 1x squared, and then you should be able to handle it, okay? However, what happens when you do that is you're probably going to end up with fractions. For example, in this one, if I divide by 2 all the way across, right there I'm going to get x squared minus 3x equals 5 over 2. Right away I have a fraction. And then if I try to half it, square it, add it, the middle term is a 3, so when I half it, I get another fraction, and I square it, I get a bigger fraction, okay? So either way, I'm going to be dealing with a lot of fractions if I try to go that way. So what you need to, the other method that you can use instead is this, and I like this method much better, okay? What the other method you can use instead is to turn that first term into a perfect square. Just like we saw in the previous examples, if the first term is a perfect square, like 16 here, or 4 over here, if the first term is a perfect square, we can handle it. So turn that first term into a perfect square by multiplying instead of dividing. Okay? So a lot of times you'll see it right away. Most of the time you're going to multiply by the exact same number. That way you turn it into a perfect square, right? So if I multiply everything here by, let's say, 2, everything by 2, then the first term will be 4, which is a perfect square. Okay, so most of the time you're just going to multiply by the exact same number. Sometimes you don't have to multiply by the exact same number. There's a way for you to make a perfect square without multiplying by the exact same number. Okay, but most of the time you're going to be doing that. Let me show you guys exactly how it works. Ignore the work here. It is correct, but I want to show you guys step by step how we got to that point. Okay, so I'm going to be working over here. 2x squared minus 6x equals 5. Okay, so watch how I do it on this side over here. 2x squared minus 6x equals 5. The first term, a, is not a perfect square. Okay, so we like 1, or we like a perfect square if it's not 1. This is not a perfect square, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it into a perfect square by multiplying times 2. And then what I get is a brand new equation that looks like this. 4x squared minus 12x equals 10. And now my first term is a perfect square, which is what I wanted. So now I can do what I did in the last few problems. Half it, square it, divided by a, add it. Now when I say divided by a, forget about this one right here. That is not a. A is now 4. Okay, this is your new a. So when I say half it, square it, divided by a, I mean this a. Okay, so here we go. Half it, square it, divided by a. Half of 12 is 6. Square it is 36. Divided by 4, which is a, you get 9. We're going to add 9 to both sides. So it looks like this. 4x squared minus 12x plus 9 equals 19. 10 plus 9. Now the left side is a perfect square trinomial, so I can factor it. The square root of the first term is 2x. The square root of the last term is 3. The middle term is negative. And on the right side, it's just 19. To get rid of the square, I take the square root of both sides. That cancels. So I get 2x minus 3 equals plus or minus radical 19. Don't forget the plus or minus. I add 3 to both sides. I'm not going to split it up into two solutions in this case. I'm going to leave it. So I get 2x equals 3 plus or minus radical 19. And finally, I divide by 2. And there's my final answer. X equals 3 plus or minus radical 19 all over 2. Okay, so now look at this one. Part B, 3x squared plus 3x equals 16. Once again, the first coefficient, the first a term, is not a perfect square. Okay, so since the coefficient of x squared is 3, which is not a perfect square, we're going to multiply both sides by a value so that it will be a perfect square. So what can I multiply by? In this case, the only thing I can think of is 3, right? If you multiply by 3, you get 9. That's a perfect square. So here's my equation, 3x squared plus 3x equals 16. I need to multiply both sides by 3. So I need to put a 3 here, and also on the right side, 3. Okay? So what I have now after I multiply by 3 is this. 9x squared plus 6x equals 48. Okay, at this point I'm going to half it, square it, divide it by a, add it. Okay, so do that on your head. I don't want to go through this. Do it in your head. Half it, 6. Half of 6 is 3. Square it, 9. Divided by a, which is 9, you get 1. Your magic number is 1. So try that again if you don't see it yet. Half of 6 is 3. Square it, 9. Divided by a, which is 9, you get 1. So my equation now looks like this. 9x squared plus 6x plus 1. And on the right side, it's 48 plus 1. We're adding 1. Factor the left trinomial. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 1 is 1. And on the right, I have 49. Take the square root of both sides, which is the way to get rid of the square. I get 3x plus 1 equals plus or minus radical 49, which, by the way, is a perfect square, so it's plus or minus 7. Okay, I'm going to split it up into 2. So I have 3x plus 1 equals positive 7, or 3x plus 1 equals negative 7. Solve them both. Let's solve the one on the left side first. I have 3x, subtract 1, and you get 3x equals 6. Divide by 3, you get 2. On the right side, subtract 1, you get 3x equals negative 8. Divide by 3, and you get negative 8 over 3. You get a fraction on that one. And those are your final answers. Now let's look at this reflection question right here. It says, consider the equation 2x squared plus 11x equals 12. Why is 2 the best value by which to multiply both sides of the equation before completing the square? So think about that. Why is 2 your best option? It seems obvious to many of you guys, but I don't have to multiply by 2, right? I could multiply by, let's say, 8. If I multiply by 8, I get 16. 16 is a perfect square, so that fulfills my requirements. But when you get 16, you're dealing with larger numbers. So 2 is the best value because it gives you the smallest possible coefficients for your entire equation. And that's what you want. You want a perfect square at the beginning. The smaller, the better, right? Like 1 is the best. But anything, if you can't make a 1, then anything small enough. Okay, so it's your turn. Try this one right here. 1/2 x squared plus 3x equals 14. I'll give you a hint for number 11. If you want to make that first term a perfect square, all you have to do is multiply by 2. When you do that, you'll get 1. 1 is a perfect square. 1 is the easiest one to handle. Okay. When it is 1, then all you have to do is half it, square it, add it, right? Don't worry about half it, square it, divided by a, add it. So once again, pause it right here, try it on your own, and then come back once you're ready to see what the correct answers are. Okay, so here we go. Solve the equation by completing the square. So first thing, like I gave you in the hint, first thing I'm going to do is multiply everything by 2. And why am I choosing 2? Because when I multiply times 2, 2 times 1/2 makes 1. Okay, so that's what I want. I want 1x squared, which is a perfect square. 3 times 2 is 6, so 6x. And on the right side I have 28. Look at that. Perfect. Half it, square it, divided by a, but in this case, since a is 1, you really don't have to do that step. It's just half it, square it, add it. Half it, 6, half of 6 is 3, square it is 9, add it. We're going to add 9 to both sides. 28 plus 9 is going to be 37. Okay? Factor the left side. It's going to be x plus 3. Well, you should be more familiar with that step now. Take the square root of the first one, take the square root of the last one, keep the sign of the middle one. Equals 37. Because 2 times 14 is 28, and then we added 9, so 37. Take the square root of both sides, and I get x plus 3 equals plus or minus radical 37. And then finally subtract 3. X equals negative 3 plus or minus radical 37. That is your final solution. Okay, number 12. In this case, the best thing you can do, there's two things you can do. Remember, you want the first term to be a perfect square. In this case, if you divide by 2, you'll get 1x squared minus 2x equals 8. That is perfect for working with, okay? However, if you didn't see that, you probably multiply by 2. So let's go with that option. You probably multiply by 2, so you get 4x squared minus 8x equals 32. Half it, square it, divided by a, add it. Half of 8 is 4, square it is 16. Divided by a, which is 4, 16 divided by 4 is 4. Your magic number is 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. Plus 4 equals 36. Factor the left side. It's a perfect square trinomial. The first one is 2x. The square root of the last term is 2. Keep the sign of the middle term, so minus equals 36. Take the square root of both sides to cancel the square. 2x minus 2 equals plus or minus, 36 is a perfect square, so plus or minus 6. Add 2 to both sides, so 2x equals, now remember when you add 2, you got to consider the positive 6 and the negative 6. Positive 6 plus 2 is 8. Negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. And finally, divide by 2. Don't forget to do it to both of your solutions there. So your final answer is x equals 4. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And negative 2, because negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. There it is.